Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf. Whoa, not that. Today's daf is daf tzadik tet. We are at the very top of tzadik tet and Alf, but we have one thing that we wanted to cover from yesterday. So let me share my screen and we will get started. So yesterday we were going through a Tosos, and Kenneth asked the question, wasn't 100%. So I want to go back over that Tosos. So let's turn back to Tzadik Zion. I'm a bet 97b, and we'll go over the Tosos. The Tosos is Lema. It's the third Tosos on the daf. 1, 2, 3, fourth line down in the widest lines of Tosos, in the wide lines of Tosos. In the bottom wide lines of Tosos. The Im Tomar. So the Tosos ask, if you want to ask, if you have a question. So Vahamas Nisan Mukila Besama Kasum, because we're about to, and we saw over the course of the last 2 days that we attribute this Mishnah like Sumchus, because we say at the end that if that if both people don't know what the story is, rather than leaving the item where it is, we say yachloku, you divide it. And so given that we've set this up like sumchas, the lo azul basar chazaka, that seems to be that you would say that he does not follow the chazaka of where the location is item, but rather you split it. The islay mamon hamutal b'savah. And he's the one who says that if you have money that's uncertain, where we don't know the outcome, cholkin, we divide it. Maybe it's only for him that we would say that a certain claim will defeat an uncertain claim. Even to take money away from somebody. The Rav Nachman, because Rav Nachman, right, the question that the Gemara was asking is, maybe this is a contradiction to Rav Nachman, who says that that when you have Bari V'Shema, you don't take it away. You don't do it lahotzi. And for Rav Nachman, Karabanan. And maybe the Rav Nachman would be like the rabbis who disagree with Sumchus, who say that when you have Shema V'Shema, you leave it where it is. The Islay lahu, because they're the ones who say Hamotzi Mechaveru Alav Haraya. And so maybe that's why Rav Nachman is inconsistent with our Mishnah when it comes to Bari V'Shem. Inami, or alternatively, Rav Nachman Asi Shaper Kasumchas. Or you could even say that Rav Nachman follows Sumchas, Demoda Sumchas, Hecha Deleka Drara de Mimona, de Hamotzi Mechaveru Alav Haraya, that maybe Sumchus would even agree that where there isn't a very clear dispute, meaning the money is clear that we have the dispute about, because the animal that we're saying it either died before or while I was a borrower or while I was a renter, that animal is right in front of us. So we have the object about which we are disagreeing right here. So maybe only when we don't have that, maybe when we don't have that kind of obvious dispute, so then Sumchus would say also Hamotzi Mechaveru of Haraya, and therefore would be consistent again with Rav Nachman, who says Hamotzi Mechaveru of Haraya, even in Bari and Shema cases. So V'yesh Lomar, so we can say Dil Sumchus de Islay Mamon Hamutal B'Savik Chokin, that when Sumchus says that we divide money that we're uncertain about, Havi Ke'ilu Tarvayu Muchzakin Bo, it's actually as if both people have a chazaka in it. The Kavan Day Ahani Bari Neged Shema B'Chayev Hakol, so Hachinami Havi Leila Meimer L'Rabbanan. So let's pause that and we'll break this phrase down. And since according to, now what's the difference between the rabbis and Sumchus? Well, the Sumchus says that if we're uncertain about the ownership of this computer, let's say, we divide it. Whereas the rabbis say, if we're uncertain about the ownership of this computer, we say, where is it? And Hamotzi Mechaveru Alav Haraya. Possession is 9/10 of the law. Exactly. So since what does Sumcha say with respect to Bari v'Shema? With respect to Bari and Shema, instead of splitting this, now the person who's Bari, the person who's certain, gets all of it, and the person who's Shema, the person who's uncertain, gets none of it. So, and remember, in the case of the rabbis, effectively the difference was you get 50. The person who's muksak in the item, the person who's holding the item, gets 100% instead of 50%. So now maybe we could say so. Now that we say that when Sumcha says that if we have a Bari and Shema, we're going to make it 100% to 0%. So we could say that according to the rabbis, the Ahani Nami Bari Neged Shema, that when you also have a certainty versus an uncertainty, L'chol hapachot lomar shiachloku, you should at least take away half from the person who says from the person who's uncertain, right? You should at least take away half from the person who's uncertain, even if the person who's uncertain is holding it. So even if the person who's uncertain is holding it, you should at least take away half. And maybe you should take away the whole thing, meaning maybe the rabbis would agree to Sumchas. And so that's the answer. The answer is that actually, according to Sumchas, Bari versus Shema does take away from a mukzak. So you can't say that Rav Nachman holds like Sumchas. And you can't say that Rav Nachman holds like the rabbis, because maybe the rabbis would say that when you have Bari versus Shema, you have to at least give the Bari half of it. Maybe you give the Bari all of it. So the point is that it's not clear how the rabbis would hold in the case of our Mishnah, and therefore you can't for certain say that Rav Nachman follows them. In the end, I believe actually the rabbis, of course, would agree with Rav Nachman and say that you don't get any, and you say Hamotzi Mechaveru Olav Haraya at all times, unless you're unable to swear, as we've noted in the Gemara over the last few days. So that is the Tosfos. That's what I was trying to say yesterday. Hopefully that's clearer. And so, Kenneth, if you have any questions, let me know. But I think that what it was trying with the last few words of that Tosfos are saying that at the very least, the rabbis would say that you get 50%, and therefore, since they're not saying that the muksa keeps all of it, it would be still inconsistent with Rav Nachman's approach.
Okay. But isn't Bari v'Shema Adif? Isn't that a general rule that Bari v'Shema, Bari is Adif?
It is.
What's the chiddush then?
No, it's a very big chiddush, because a Bari versus Shema, Bari Adif, it can apply when nobody is holding the item. But when somebody is muchsuk in the item, that is not clear at all that Bari v'Shema, Bari Adif. So if I'm holding something and you say, that's my laptop, and I say, I don't know whose laptop it is, but I don't know that it's yours, but it's in my possession and it's in my backyard, and it's in my home. You don't get to just take it from me. You have to be a tamotzi mechaveru olav haraya. You actually have to prove it. So, now if there's some reason that I have to swear about it, then, you can claim it and take it away, and I won't be able to do anything about it. But in an ordinary case, I believe we hold like Rav Nachman. So, that in that situation, if you tell me I owe you $100, and I say I have no idea what you're talking about. I mean, I borrow from people sometimes, and I could imagine that maybe I borrow from you, but I don't remember ever borrowing from you. I have no idea. But I'm not in the position to deny it. I'm just in the position to say I don't know. You never win in those cases. I mean, that's the halacha. You don't win. So that's the story. So yes, you're absolutely right that in general we say Bari b'Shem and Bari Adif, but the context of that is, and the scope of when we apply it is more limited. We don't apply it in every situation. If I'm muchzak in the item, we will not, and I'm the shema, we will not necessarily say bari b'shema bari adif. On the other hand, of course, if you're muchzak in the item, then of course bari b'shema bari adif. So okay, so now
So in that case, then this seems to be a case of where the item is currently exists at this time. If the item is
yeah, well, we're
in the
talking about
middle
that
of the
where the
road.
item in the case in the that Tosfos is talking about, in the case in our Mishnah that we're specifically referring to, the person who's holding it is the one who has the Shema claim, who's uncertain about how, whether or not he's entitled to the item. He doesn't know for sure. In the specific example, he's not sure whether the animal died, during the time that he was a
Right.
borrower, in which case he would be liable, or whether it died during the time that he was the renter, in which case he would not be liable. And so as a result, that's why, but in that case, our Mishnah said Bari B'Shema Bari Adif, and we were saying that maybe it's inconsistent with Rav Nachman, and we ended up, the Gemara, of course, provided solutions. But the question that the Gemara that Tosfos was asking is why maybe maybe it doesn't have to be consistent with our Mishnah, because maybe our Mishnah is unlike the rabbis. And in the end, we say that no, even the rabbis would say that potentially at least half would go to the person who is certain. And so as a result, there would be an inconsistency with Rav Nachman. Okay.
And Simchas could say that too then.
Of
So
course, Sumchus would say it. It's very clear that there's a problem for Sumchus with Rav Nachman. But the point is we don't hold like Sumchus. So as a result, it wouldn't be such a problem for Rav Nachman to say, yeah, I just don't hold like Sumchus. The problem is that if he's also inconsistent with the rabbis, who we do paskin like, then that would be a problem, because how could with whom would he be consistent? And so as a result, that's why we qualify them for the prior Mishnah, and say that the Mishnah is talking about a situation where there's an extra animal, and it's a situation of moda b'miktsas. And because it's a moda b'miktsas case, that's why you're going to have to swear. And given the person's uncertainty, he's not going to be able to swear, and therefore we're going to allow the person who is certain to take it away from the person who's uncertain. Okay, let's turn to Tzadik Tet Amud Aleph. That was a nice review from yesterday of that Tosfos. So I had a chance to go over it. And so, as I mentioned at the end of the day yesterday, the Gemara is now going to wonder how a borrower could be liable if the lender sends the animal with the lender's own slave, even if the borrower agrees to it. Because biyad abdo chayiv, we're again very top of Tzadik Tet Amud Aleph. You're going to say that with the hand of by sending it with your own slave, the borrower is going to be liable. Yad eved ki yad rabbo. The slave's hand is just like the slave's master's hand, and so as a result, as Rashi says, bid me. This is a question. Katani Amar Le'ashoa. We said in our Mishnah that if the borrower says Shalcha li biyad abdecha, to send it with your slave, the Shalcha lo, and he goes ahead and the owner sends it to him, Chayav Hashoel, the borrower is liable ba'onseha b'derech, with any kind of unavoidable mishap that happens along the way. B'harei lo yatas mirishus hamashil. But in fact, the animal has never left the possession of the lender. The yad eved ki yad rabo damya, because the hand of the slave is just like the hand of the master. V'harehu ke'ilu holicha lohu. It's as if the master himself, it's as if the owner himself took the animal to the borrower. And if the owner himself took the animal to the borrower, for sure there wouldn't be liability until the animal was actually in the possession of the borrower. It wouldn't be liable. There would no liability for the borrower on the way. So Amar Shmuel be'eved Ivri. No, we're not talking about an Eved Kanani whose body is literally owned by the owner, but rather we're talking about a Jewish servant who has been sold to the owner for a period of 6 years. And so as a result, the low kanile gufe, his body is not acquired by the owner, and therefore, when he takes it, it's not yad abdo kiyad rabo. So therefore, it would not be a problem, our Mishnah. Rav Amar Afilu Tema Be'ebed Kanani. No, Rav says, you know what? You can even tell me that it's talking about a non-Jewish slave. Nazaka Omer Le, because it's as if he said, Hakisha b'makel v'hi tavo. It's as if when you sent it, when I send it with my slave, it's as if you said to me, just hit the cow with the stick, and it'll eventually come to me. And so therefore, that's why I was going to, and so as a result, even though my slave went with it, you are going to be liable because you told me to just hit the cow with the stick. It's as if you told me to hit the cow with a stick and it would come to you. And so you were saying effectively, don't worry about watching it along the way. Meisvei, 1 second. How could Rav's interpretation be true? Because we have a brisa that says Hashoav hapara v'shilchalo. If one were to borrow a cow and it's sent to him biyad beno biyad shlucho with the lender's son or the lender's agent chayiv, the borrower is liable. And obviously, we're talking about a situation where it was asked to be sent. But biyad abdo putter. But when it's sent with the slave of the lender, when it's sent with the slave of the lender, the borrower is not liable. So Bishlam Shmuel. Now everything can work according to Shmuel. Masdisin ke'eved ivri. Our Mishnah is with a Jewish servant. Brisa be'eved Kanani, and this Brisa is with a non-Jewish servant. And so as a result, when it's with a non-Jewish servant, it's as if it's still in my hand until it makes it to you. Rav Kasha, but according to Rav, isn't this difficult? Because how can Rav understand? Our Mishnah says that even when you send it with a non-Jewish slave, it's going to be the borrower is going to be liable. But when you send it with but here this Brisa says when you send it with a non-Jewish slave, you're not going to be liable. Ella Amar Lach Rav. So Rav would have to tell you, Lo tema nasa ka'amar le, ella ema bi'amar le. Don't let me qualify what I said before. It's not like I said. It's not like the borrower told the lender, hit the cow with a stick and it'll come to me, but rather we're talking about where the borrower actually did say, hit hakisha bevakel v'hitavo. Go ahead and hit the cow and with a stick and it'll come to me. The Idmar, because we have the following statement in the name of Rab. You'll see that at the end we'll reference the fact that this was said in the name of Rab. Hishileni parascha, lend me your cow. V'amar lo biyad me, and then the lender says, okay, with whom should I send it? V'amar lo hekishi b'makav v'tavo, hit it with a stick and it'll just come to me. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba Abaravu, Amar Rav, Kevin sheyatzas. Again, it was said in the name of Rav, Kevin sheyatzas mirishus mashil umesa chayev. Since it left the hand of the lender, you're going to be liable. So Nema Misayele. Well, 1 second. All right, so we've now qualified that if you actually said that, that would be the situation. Well, 1 second. Maybe we can use the following brisa as a proof to Rav. Hishileni paraska. We have a brisa that says, "Lend me your cow." V'amrlei biyad me, and the person says, "With whom shall I send?" V'amrlei akisha b'makel v'hisavo, and hit it with a stick, and it'll come to me. Kevan sheyatzas mirishus mashiel umesa chayev. Since it left the hand of the lender, and now it's died, chayev, the borrower is liable. So doesn't that show that maybe actually Rav is right in the first place? So I'm a Ravashi. 1 second. We have to understand that brisa is not talking about a regular case. Rather, it's a situation where there is no other location for the cow to go other than my property. So I'll be the borrower. Stan will be the lender. So I tell Stan, just hit your cow and it'll come to me. Well, if my field, the only way to get to my field from the Rishus HaRabim is by going through Stan's field. So I have a right of way through Stan's field. And I tell Stan, listen, just hit it towards me. And I don't have anything to worry about because the animal will end up in my field eventually because the animals go in the way that you hit them. So to keep Mishalchala, So that way, when you hit it, when you send it out, it's definitely going to come in my direction. Well, one second. If you're going to qualify that brisa so much, then what is it actually sharing? So lo tzricha deika yosa. Now, no, we're talking about where there are narrow passages. Basically, there are hiding places. So ma'odatema, what might I have thought? Lo samcha daite, that if there are hiding places, so then I'm going to be worried that maybe it'll go to one of those hiding places, dilma kaima hasam below asya azlahaja, and it won't actually make it all the way to my property. So kamash malan to some kadaita. No, I'm okay with that. Even if there are potential hiding places along the way, I know it'll eventually make it to me, and so therefore I'm okay with it. And so that brisa is necessary. But in the end, the brisa does not, in fact, prove Rav's understanding of our Mishnah. Okay, so that is item number one. Now the Gemara turns to, instead of borrowing an animal, what happens if you borrow a hatchet? And we have a statement that seems to be inconsistent with our Mishnah. Amar Rav Huna Hashoa Kardom Chavero. Rav Huna says that if you borrow a hatchet from somebody, from your friend, Bakabo Kanao, when you chop with it, you've acquired it. Lo Bakabo, you haven't chopped with it. Lo Kanao, you haven't acquired it. So Lamai, what are you talking about? Because Ilema La Onusin, if you tell me that it's only by chopping with it that the borrower becomes liable for anything that's unavoidable, an unavoidable mishap. So Maishna Para, why is that different from a cow where it can be, when it comes to the cow, I can be liable even during the journey of the cow to me before I do even one stitch of work with it. So the Mishas She'ela, with the cow, it's as soon as it's as soon as I'm borrowing it, I'm liable. So that can't be it. So as a result, we're going to say no, it's for taking it back. Meaning that if the lender says, you know what, I know I said that you could borrow this hatchet, but I don't want you to use it. I need to use it. So in that situation, then you can retract it as long as the borrower hasn't used it. Bakabo, once the borrower uses it, lo matzi hadar bei mashal. You can't take back. There's no backsies. Meaning, if you gave me, your pen to use during this class, and I start using it, you've already allowed me to use it during the time period of the borrowing. And of course, you can ask for it back, but you can't demand it back because you've already agreed to lend it to me. So lo bakabo, but if I haven't yet chopped with it, matzi mashel hader bay. The lender can say, no, I don't want to give it to you. I don't want to lend it to you, even though it's in the possession of the borrower. Upligi de Rabbi Ami, and this
How is he able to extract it from him?
Well, I mean,
when he lent it to him, or he could for 2 months or a month and a half, and if the person doesn't use it for the night, doesn't use it, he doesn't have a need to use it, but it's still his right to use it for that period, that contractual period.
Yeah, so maybe you'd have to take him to court. That's true. Maybe you'd have to take him to court to get it back, but the court would entitle you to get it back. So if I lend you my computer and I say you can borrow it for 2 months and you haven't used it yet, and we're now 3 weeks in, and I realize, oh my gosh, I really need my computer back. And I say, listen, I want my computer back. And you say, no, I don't want to give it to you. Even though I haven't used it yet, I still need to use it. And I say, look, I have the right. You haven't used it yet. I have the right to take it back. Even if we were to go to court, even if you at that point were to use it, I would be entitled to get it back. They would give it back to me because you hadn't used it up to that point. Now, of course, if you had used it, I would have to let you continue to borrow it for the rest of the 2 months. Okay.
But what's it? I don't. How is that written into the deal? Where is that? If a person, if you borrow something,
that's exactly right. I mean, the Rishonim here all wonder. So, like, how in the world does this work? Right? You're exactly right. And so either it's some kind of tikkun olam of if we don't allow lenders to do this, they won't lend, or something along those lines, that we need to provide this right. That effectively, it doesn't make sense that we would necessarily give this right to the lender, but we give this right to the lender in order to make things all work well. But you're absolutely right that, like, on what basis. But so in the end, you're absolutely right that effectively it is an implicit term in any loan that if you haven't used it and I need it back, you are going to return it to me. That's exactly right.
That's it. But I'm just thinking, when would at some point the borrower would realize that this person could renege on an agreement, and borrowers may never want to borrow from that person again. Or in another, or the other, on the other hand, the borrower may say, he's giving it to me for 2 months. I'm going to use it immediately. I'm going to push my finger on that computer key. The second he gives it to me, that will assure that I can use it. So
Correct. Both of those are absolutely true. Absolutely. I think both those statements are absolutely accurate. And that would be likely results from this rule, 100%. But this rule is not, I'm not sure. I don't know. In fact, I don't think that we actually paskin this way. That instead, we're going to paskin as we're about to say. So, upli de Rabbi Ami. This all disagrees with Rabbi Ami, because the Amar Rabbi Ami, Hamashal Kardum Shel Hektish. If I have a hatchet that belongs to Hektish, that belongs to Hektish, and I don't remember that it belongs to Hektish, and I lend it to you, so here's what happens. Ma'al lefi tovas hana shabo. As soon as I lend it to you, Stan, I have misappropriated property of Hektish. And because I have gotten from Hektish the value of you being thankful to me for lending you the axe. And now, even though that axe was a Hektish axe, you, Stan, have every right to use it, even though it was Hektish. Because as soon as I ma'albo, as soon as I perform me'ila and misappropriate that axe, it goes from Hektish to Chulin. It is no longer sanctified, it's unsanctified, and so as a result, you are allowed to use it. The ilo kana'o amai mal. But 1 second, if Rabbi Ami did not think that as soon as I gave you the axe, you had made a kinyan on it, and therefore it became as if it was yours, why would I have any me'ila? The amai chaveru muta l'amai chaveru muta l'vakeya bo l'chatchila. I would have you have to chop with it. Nahadre. Until you chop with it, I can retract. And so below likni lo limal. And as a result, if you have, according to the way we just explained, according to Rav Huna, I shouldn't be ma'al, because until you actually use the axe, I could undo the loan to you and thereby never have loaned you anything, and thereby never have been performed me'ila and never misappropriated the item. Given the fact that Rabbi Ami says that I have done me'ila, he must disagree with Rav Huna. And because we paskin like Rabbi Ami, it's clear that we actually do not paskin like Rav Huna, and as a result, although you are right to have been raised all of those concerns, we don't end up worrying about those concerns because we don't, in fact, allow the lender to retract just because the borrower hasn't used the item. Upligi the Rebbe Lazar. And Rav Huna would disagree with Rebbe Lazar. Rebbe Lazar, just as we say that taking something, drawing it near, and effectively picking it up, is how you buy something as a purchaser. So too, when you're any of the kinds of watchers, if you, until you actually take it, it's not actually, you're not really watching. You're not responsible for it yet. So Tanya Nami Hachi. And we have a brisa that says the same thing. Kishem shetiknu Mashicha b'lakuchos, kach tiknu Mashicha b'shomrim. Ukashem, as we turn to Tzadik Tet Amabet, Kashem shekarka niknas b'kesef u'v'shtar v'chazaka, kach schirus nikna b'kesef v'shtar v'chazaka. So just as land is acquired through money, through a document, through some kind of act that shows ownership, so too, when you have rent something, you acquire it that way. Now, initially, as Rashi points out in the second line of Rashi, we originally think that we're renting movable objects like animals and vessels. So the Gemara immediately asks, why are you talking about renting here? And in what way is that true? Because you can't use money to acquire movable property. So Rav Chisda clarifies, Schiras Karka, we're talking about renting real property. And just as when you buy real property, you require a certain kind of kinyan, so too when you rent real property, those same methods of acquisition will apply as well.
But why can't you rent an axe or rent? Why are you saying? I don't understand why
you
does
can
not rent to apply. Why does not the money transfer apply to movable objects?
You can rent an axe with money, but your rental does not take effect when you hand the money over. Just like when you hand the money to buy an axe, it doesn't take effect when you hand the money over. You have to pick up the object. Because remember, as we saw earlier in Bava Metzia, the rabbis established that, at least according to one of the opinions, but according to one of the opinions of Gemara, but I think we follow that opinion. The rabbis established that that kesef lav kona, that money, paying the money, does not transfer the ownership of the item you're buying. Rather, you have to actually take possession of it, because we're worried that if you were to buy the grain that I have in my attic, well, I'll tell you tomorrow when you pick up the grain, I'm very sorry to say that grain was burned up in a fire last night. And so as a result, you've paid me. It was your stuff. And as a result, you lost it. So since we are worried about that, we say that in order for you to take and make an acquisition, make a purchase definitive, you have to take the item being purchased and make a kinyan on it. And we don't use money, documents, and chazaka for kinyanim for movable objects. That's how we make a kinyan for immovable objects, namely real estate. And so as a result, that's why we wonder how could it be that we were talking about rental of movable property and talking about money as a method of acquisition. Okay, so that brings us, since the Gemara mentioned one case of Me'ila, it's going to now address another case of Me'ila. So Shmuel says the following: Amar Shmuel, Haiman de Gazel Chavitza to Tamre Mechaberu. If you steal a cake of pressed dates from somebody, V'isba Chamishin Tamre, and there are 50 dates in it, Agav Hadadi Mizdabnan Binun Nachichada. That if at that moment, if they're all together, they're sold for 50 minus 1, i.e. 49. But Chadachadam is Dabdun Binun. But if you sell them each individually, you can sell them for 50. So Lahedjo, if you have stolen them from a regular person, Misham Chamishim Nachichada, you have to pay 50 minus 1 or 49. Lahektish Misham Chamishim Kum Shaihu. But if you stole it from Hektish, you pay 50 plus 1/5, because of course there's the penalty of paying 1/5 if you steal from the Beit HaMikdash. So Masha ain't came to Mazik, but that's not true when it comes to doing damage to Hektish property. To Lo Mishalim Chumsha, there you don't pay the extra 1/5. To Amarmar, what does the Torah say about this? The Torah says, Ish ki yochal kodesh, that when a person eats holy, that's where they have to add a 5th. Now that pasuk is actually talking about truma, but the same principle applies also to hektish, prat lamazik. So that excludes somebody who does damage. Meaning, if you do damage either to hektish or to truma, you don't have to pay the 1/5 penalty. So maskif lo Rabibi bar Abaye. So Rabbi Bibi says, I don't understand something about what you just said, Shmuel. Lehedjot why do you subtract something from what you pay to a regular person versus what you pay to hektish? Namely, can't the victim say, I would have sold it one by one, and so I should be paid a full 50? So Amar Rav Huna Braid the Rav Yoshua, Shaman Beisa Osa Sada Tanan. No, we don't apply that principle because we learned, and this was a Mishnah in Bava Kama, that we learned that when somebody does damage to something, the way you value it is not based on a very narrow imagination of just the item that was damaged, but rather we take a look at a full field. If you damage part of my field, we don't just look at how much was that part of the field worth before on its own and how much is it worth now, but rather we take a saw of space of my field, the amount of space that could that could produce a saw of land, which is 50 square amos. So 50 square amos. So we take that amount of space and we say, okay, you damaged 5 square amos in that. So how much would my 50 square amos field be worth now that you damaged it? And how much was it worth before? And that's how we evaluate it. Meaning that we actually take a more lenient view of how much damage is when it's a private person's thing. So as a result, Rav Huna has explained to Rav Bibi why it is that we don't allow the victim to say, I was going to sell it one by one. Well, in second, all of this implies that Shmuel says that when you loan, when you have private property versus hektish property, you treat them differently. But we have a Mishnah that Shmuel commented on that seems to suggest that he doesn't treat hektish any differently than private property. Because listen to the following. Not al Evan Okora Mehektish. If this is a Mishnah in Me'ila, in Maseches Me'ila, that if you take a stone or a beam from hektish, lomal, you have not performed hektish, you've not done Me'ila on it because you have not yet used it. Nasna lechavero, if you gave it to your friend, humal lechavero lomal. Though you have been done Me'ila because you have given it to somebody and you got the benefit of giving it to him, and your friend doesn't do Me'ila because once you've done Me'ila on something, it becomes a chulin, and so as a result, you're not going to have violated anything. Bana b'tok beito, but if you build it into your house, lo ma'al achi yader tachta b'shava pruta. But if you build it into your house, well, then you are not going to have performed Me'ila because there's nothing changed yet in the item until you actually live under it. Then when you live under it, you have benefited from it. And now once you have benefited a pruta amount, so now you have performed Me'ila. The Yosef Rabbi Abahu kamed to Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Abahu was sitting in front of Rabbi Yochanan. The Yosef Ka'amar Mishmei de Shmuel, and he said that the following was said by Shmuel. Zosomeris, this Mishnah shows Hadar b'chatzar chaveiro, Hadar b'chatzar chaveiro, that if you live in the field of your friend, shalomi daito, without his knowledge, sarach lahalos lo skar, you have to pay him rental. So doesn't that Mishnah show that? And how can you say that? That only applies if you're going to treat hektish and hedyot and private property identically. So hadar be Shmuel ma'ahi. So no, it must be that Shmuel retracted his statement from in that situation. How do you know he retracted that one? Dilma mehahadar. Maybe he retracted his ruling regarding the stolen cake of pressed dates, saying that in fact that in that situation you should pay 50 to private people just like you pay 50 to hektish. Lo, it makes much more sense to say that he retracted over there. Because Rava says the following to Amar Rava, hektish shalomidas kehedros midas dami, that when you take something from hektish without knowledge, then it is like you took hedyot with knowledge. And so as a result, that statement of Rava, based on this Mishnah, is highlighting that in fact we don't treat hektish like private property, because again, hektish without knowledge is treated like private property with knowledge. So as a result, we're going to say that in fact Shmuel retracts what he said over there. He agrees with Rava, and he would say here as well that hektish and private property are treated differently, and that you pay 50 for hektish and 49 for private property. Okay, so
Which statement did Shmuel retract then?
he retracted his case in connection with taking a stone or a beam from the Beis Hamikdash. That he said based on that if you live in somebody's courtyard without not their knowledge, you have to pay them something, and that is not necessarily true. That you can't learn that from this Mishnah. That's what he effectively retracted.
Well, those are two separate. The living with a beam is different from living in someone else's property. Those are two separate cases.
So right? You're right that they're two separate cases, but the fact that Shmuel analogized them, because again, when you live under the beam, you're benefiting from the beam without having gotten permission from hektish. And so as a result, it's just like living in somebody else's courtyard without having gotten permission from them. That was Shmuel's thinking. And based on that, you can see that Shmuel thinks that the treatment of hektish is just like the treatment of private property. And so we reject that thinking in the end and say that Shmuel retracted that. And in fact, does not treat taking from the Beit HaMikdash property without knowledge like taking from a private person without knowledge, but rather taking from the Beit HaMikdash without knowledge is like taking from a private person with knowledge. And so as a result, the analogy is no longer to say that hektish and hedyot are treated identically. And so as a result, we can maintain Shmuel's statement here where you pay 50 to hektish and 49 to hedyot, and you're not treating hektish and hedyot identically. Okay, Amar Rava. So now another situation where the valuation varies. So let's take a look. Amar Rava, Hani Shekule B'Tavru Chavisa Dechamra Lechenva'a. Right. So we had some people who were carrying some jugs of wine, and they broke it. They broke them. So and they broke it, and they belonged to the shopkeeper. Biyoma Deshukam Mizdavna Behei. On the market day, they would be sold for 5. Bishar Yomim is Dabna Be'arba, but on other days, they're sold for 4 because there's not as much demand. Ahadrule Biyoma Deshuka, if you are able to return the wine to the person before the market day, so Mahadrule Chavisa Dechamra, you can return the jug of and everything is fine. Bishar Yomim, but if you return on a different day, Mahadrule, hey, you actually have to pay the full value of 5. The low amran ella de low havale chamra lezabune. But we only say this when when the person has no other wine to sell. Aval havale chamra lezabune. But if he does have other wine to sell, he should sell that wine. Meaning, if he sells out of the wine, then he's back into the situation where he has no other wine to sell. So the point is that if in fact he comes through the day and he hasn't sold all of his property, so then it's fine to just give him back the barrel of wine. Or you can give him 4 because 4 is enough for him to buy the barrel on a jug on a non-market day. So he would be okay. Umenakile agar tirche. But by the way, when you have to pay him the 5, you get to deduct a little bit, because when somebody sells something, there's some work that's involved. Udeme barzanyasa, and there's also a cost of tapping, meaning putting the hole in the barrel. So there are costs that he saved because you've done the damage, and those costs are you don't have to pay for those costs if you did damage. Okay, so let's take a look.
opening the barrel then? Is it the person who's returning it?
No, well, so again, the person who's returning it broke the barrel, so he's paying for the damage that he did. So that's what we're talking
But
about.
why is he allowed to deduct something
Because
from it?
if
Because
you,
the
all right,
shopkeeper
I'll be the
still has to
seller,
open it, right?
I'll be the seller, you be the person who you be the messenger. So you broke my barrel, and now and you're coming back to pay me. But if I had sold that barrel, yes, I would have sold it for $5. But I would have had to spend the effort of buying a cork. I would and making the hole in the barrel and plugging the hole. And according to Rashi, instead of saying Barzan Yasa, it actually says Karzan Yasa, and it's actually referring to the crier that I would have had to do advertising associated with it. The point is that there would be cost and work that I would have done in order to sell it for that $5. And so, because when you give me $5 and because you broke it, I no longer have to pay for those costs. You can reduce the amount you pay me and only pay me the amount minus the cost that I minus my advertising and employee expenses that I would have had otherwise for selling that item.
Who doesn't have to pay for the cost?
What?
Who does not have to pay for the cost?
You broke my barrel. You broke my $5 barrel that I'm selling for $5. And so now that you broke it, you owe me $5. Except that because you broke it, I didn't have the selling expenses. So if those selling expenses on an average basis were 30 cents a barrel, so now instead of paying me $5, you could pay me $4.70 because really that was the net that I was going to net from that barrel. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at the next Mishnah. The next Mishnah addresses conflicts in sales situations, many of which are comparable to the conflicts that arise between lenders and borrowers, which we saw over the last few Mishnayos. So Hamakhlif para b'chamor, if we trade a cow for a donkey, v'yalda, and now the cow had a baby, v'chein hamocher shifchaso v'yalda, and similarly, if I sell a slave woman and she gives birth, Zeomer. So we'll do it. The transaction will be me and Stan. So Zeomer, Stan says, Ad shalom macharti. I'm sorry. I say, Ad shalom macharti, that it gave birth before I sold Stan the cow or the slave. Zeomer mishalakakti. And Stan says, of course, no, she gave birth after I bought it. So as a result, Yachloku, we're going to divide. Now let's take a look at Rashi, because Rashi's going to, if you probably noticed, that the first situation was Hamachlif para b'chamor. You trade the cow for a donkey. And the second situation was Hamocher shifcha. So you sell the shifcha. And Rashi explains why. Lahachi nachet hamachlif. This is why we say specifically that you exchange it. V'lo amar hamocher paraso. The yalda, and we don't say that you sold the cow and it gave birth. De'ilu mocher b'mos, because if we were to have sold with money, lo kani lo keach ad demashich, right? Stan, as the buyer, would not have acquired the cow until he actually pulled with it. The kaven demashach, and once he pulled with it, miyada yediya I yalda kvar ilo yalda kvar. He would know whether or not the woman gave birth, right? The only reason that we have the ability to have this debate is because we really both don't know what happened. So there would be no possibility of having some kind of uncertainty about it having happened before or from afterwards. But when you make a trade, Stan does not need to actually do mashicha on the para, hachamor, or the donkey. The echad mehen shemashach niknin chalipin lechavero b'mashicha so shelzeh. So, but when once one does the mashicha on one of the animals, because we're doing an exchange, a fair value exchange, so therefore, that's all that's necessary.
But he's still pulling the animal, isn't he?
No, you're put now instead of Stan pulling the cow, I pulled the donkey, and because I pulled the donkey, Stan owns the cow, and so none of us were around the cow when it gave birth. Okay. Um, uh, um, uh, I'm blanking on this abbreviation, but okay. So I think that gets us sufficient on that. Came. Maybe it's because of Kesef Mali. Shehenka Amrin and Bahazav, and this is what we saw earlier in Parak Hazav here. Kol Hanas Adamim Ba'achar Kevan Shizacha Zeh Nischayev Zeh Bechalipin. That ones when you have this, once one person takes it, they acquire the other with Chalipin. Lefisha Kishimashach Zeh Balapara Esachamor, when the owner of the cow does Mashicha on the donkey, Nikdas Aparla Balachamor. The cow becomes owned by the owner of the donkey. Ein Yadua im Yalda o lo Yalda, and he doesn't know whether they gave birth before or after. V'chein hamoker shivchaso the kaimelan ebed kanani nikna bekesef. But a slave can be acquired with money. Because most niknas lo hashivcha. So as a result, when Stan gives me the money, the slave becomes his. Even if she's in my home still. The over the ubar shalo o achar sheyalda the havlad shel balim. So we don't know whether the fetus belongs to the buyer because she hadn't given birth, or it's after she gave birth and the child belongs to the owner. Balim zeh all right, zeh omer kain v'zeh omer kain yachloku, and so that's why each of them is going to we're going to divide it. So
but in the case of the mocher, the person who buys it, he performs mashicha, right?
No, when it comes to a slave, you don't need to do mashicha because it's like
with the slave, Okay, with the slave.
Exactly. Okay, so hayulo beis avadim. If there were two slaves, echad gadol ve'echad katan, a big one and a small one, and we're talking about a strong one and a weak one. Let's call it that way. V'chein beis sados, or two fields, echad gadola ve'echad katana, one's big and one small. Halokeach Omer Gadol Lakakti. Of course, the buyer says that he bought the big one. Vahala Omer Eniodei, and the other one says, I don't know. So Zacha Begadol. So we're going to say the buyer bought the big one. Hamocher Omer Katan Macharti. If now the smaller says, I sold the small one, Vahala Omer Eniodea, and the other one doesn't know. Ein Lo Ela Katan. So then the buyer gets only the small one. So again, Bari Vishema, Bari Adif. Ze Omer Gadol, Ze Omer Katan. If we have a dispute and they're both sure, one says it's the big, one says it's the small, Yishava hamocher shakatan machar. The seller swears that he sold the small one, and therefore the buyer will get the small one. Ze omer eini odeya. This one says I don't know. Ze omer eini odeya, and the other one says I don't know. Yachloku. You are going to divide it. Okay, so now on the point of dividing the item in question, the Gemara is going to wonder why we don't see who's holding the offspring. But for that discussion, stay tuned for tomorrow's daf.
Well, what are they dividing here? If one says he sold the big one says he bought the small one, are they dividing both of them?
Yes, effectively they sum the two together and they divide the two. Correct. Huh. Looking forward to continuing tomorrow. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.